Hi everyone, welcome back to Nader's Nemesis 2.0. It's been a while since the last video. I was hoping to do one every month and unfortunately I was not able to do that. I'm tardy. It's been about 3 months since video number 5, so we got a little catching up to do. I want to show you some of the things I've been working on since the last video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, as you can see, there's a lot more done to the chassis. The obvious thing is that it's been painted. It's got floor pans in it, and the chassis has been painted black. I've got all the welding done, top and bottom. I was able to disconnect it from the chassis, the suspension assemblies, and take it outside, clean everything up, finish doing the welding on the bottom side of everything, and then get a good coat of primer and paint on the chassis. So it's looking black like the rest of the car will be when I get it painted. But what I wanted to show you is some of the reinforcing things I've done since the last video. In particular, up front here, you'll notice that I've applied some plates on the side of the suspension, or I should say the chassis frame components that go up to the suspension assemblies. So there's some bracing on each side of that. I put another piece of tubing, 2x2 tubing, in the middle of that box and tied it into the cross member where the seat is. Again, that's 2" by 2" tubing as well. And then I gusseted that and made that stronger so that I could shore up some of the vertical stresses that might occur on that front suspension assembly as it attaches to the box frame. So you can see when I get around to the side here, some more of that gusseting that I did and building into that box. And I did that on both sides, of course, and tied that in. It's I can tell it's made it a lot more rigid and given it a lot more strength. I was kind of worried, and I'd even gotten some comments from some of you about being a little concerned on it being a little weak in that area, and I agree with those comments. The other thing I was worried about was not only torsion up and down vertical, but I was also worried about torsion side to side, horizontal. So I utilized some attachment points on the cradle that came with the Corvette suspension and created an X-bar connecting point that ties into that cross member and then bolts directly to that cradle. That gives me some strength side by side, and I think we'll make this a pretty sturdy unit up front now. So kind of give you a close-up of that. Those are 7/8" bolts that go through there and provide plenty of strength. In the rear, I've also done a little bit of reinforcing and extra strength work. The last time you saw this, the 2x3, or actually the 2x4 tubing that went across the suspension assembly was connected to a 2x3 channel that went down and tied into the main chassis component. What I've done is I've taken and put a second 2x3 in there to box that up. So that is now a 3x4" box coming down off of that suspension assembly. The idea here is again to beef up that part of the chassis. So as this rear end is torquing from the torque of the engine, that it's got a lot more strength. I've not done anything more with this. I think I may have had that angle piece in there before to again shore that up. But I am planning to put another piece that will start basically right here and run over to this corner of the chassis. But I'm gonna wait to put that in until after I've got the engine and transaxle set in, and I understand where I may run my headers and do all that kind of stuff. So that'll be done later, but that I hope will triangulate that area and give that more strength. So that's all that I've done in the backside to do reinforcing. And again, you notice that I've put in some floor pans. These are 18 gauge steel floor pans. I've cut them, I've done some bead rolling on them, and then I've welded them in. They're real sturdy, and they should give plenty of strength to the passenger compartment from a flooring standpoint. The next thing I wanted to show you is the roll bar. This roll bar is actually a kit that I bought from S&W. Believe it or not, S&W makes a roll bar, an 8-point roll bar for a Corvair, 65 through 69 Corvair. And the hoop and its bends fit precisely inside that Corvair body. I checked that out before I welded in, of course, and it fits really well. So very pleased with that. I don't have a bender, and I was hoping I could get it pre-bent for me, and they made one that worked perfectly. I've got 6 of the 8 points put in place. Obviously the 2 for the hoop, the 2 that cut across into an angle down to contact points in the chassis. Once again, this roll bar is for safety, but it's also adding more strength to the chassis by triangulating different things. The crossbar, I've made that so I can remove that. So it's got, I basically use the joints that you can in a fold-out sidebar, and I put those on each side and got it bolted. We'll have it bolted in. That's so I can take that out at some later point and be able to access the engine and transaxle from the passenger compartment. But pretty strong. I put the bars from the top of the hoop down to the chassis and got them mounted roughly where the spring perches will be to match up where the foundation point is for that chassis. And they're pretty centered up inside the A-frames as well. They spread out just a little bit. They go to the outside of that bar and then narrow up to sit on top of the frame. My plan is when the transaxle arrive and I go to set the engine and transaxle in while the car's on the jig, I'm going to do it from back here and set it in place, get everything welded in. My plan for the engine mounts and the transaxle mounts are to be able to remove the engine and transaxle from the bottom. So I'll disconnect the lower cradle from the adapter plates. I'll have to obviously drop the axles and the sway bar and a couple other pieces, but that basically unbolts with 4 bolts, and that'll come out of the way. I'll make the engine mounts removable as well and be able to drop the engine and whole drivetrain right out the bottom of the car and put it on a carrier if I have to take it out. Hopefully I won't have to do that, but that's the concept for the design. So I've got that all in place. I still have the bars to put in along the seats, and I have those, but those can't go in until after I get this chassis mounted into the car, because they're going to stick out farther than the rocker panel to make room around the seat. So that'll be done a little bit later. So that's the roll bar. The next item I wanted to update you on was the work I was doing on the dash. I mentioned this last time that I had located some gauging from Autometer and was going to work on getting that attached and placed into the Monza dash that I have. So I've got that finished, and I want to show you how it looks and talk to you a little bit about how I did that. So here's the dash. It's pretty much finished. I was able to take the speedometer and the tachometer. All 3 of these gauges actually were 3 5/8 inches in diameter. in the base, in the main body of that gauge. So those two gauges were able to slide down these two outside gauge viewing ports. The center port was smaller. So that gauge, which was this quad gauge I mentioned to you, that provides volts, oil pressure, fuel gauge, and water temp. It's a nice, interesting composite gauge that worked out really well. I was able to get it fastened into the existing mounting slots in these holes and got it held in place. These gauges are relatively light, and that's good because this dash is a mixture of plastic in the back with a aluminum coating across the front that's just, you know, crimped onto the plastic. But they fit in really well. I have LED lights for turn signal indicators, and then I bought a small LED light for high beam indicator. The lights are embedded in the gauges, so when I hook up dash lights, those lights will come on with the dash. Let me show you, turn this around and show you what the backside looks like. So these gauges, the ones that are the larger diameter gauges, I was able to take a piece of fairly thick rubber and glue it to the inside of that opening, and just slide the gauge in, let the shoulder for the bezel of that gauge ride on that, and then I clamped some brackets that I used to screw it to the existing attachment points for the gauge. The speedometer and the tachometer are both held in that way, and held very sturdy. It's nice and tight. As far as the center gauge goes, what I had to do there is I had to build up the opening to make it a little bit larger, and then was able to basically place the front of the bezel against that opening, and once again attach that gauge to that opening with the existing screws that were now clamped around the outside of that gauge. So it holds it in really sturdy. This center gauge, I'm probably going to look for a place inside the car dash area to reinforce it, to tie the back up so going over bumps and shakes and that doesn't jiggle loose and want to put any pressure on that plastic dash. I may do that across all three of them once I get access into that dash. Then I've also at the same time used Deutsch connectors, and I have all of the sending units and wires going to sending units, lights, and all those things, power, all built into a couple of connectors so that I can just disconnect two connectors and take this dash assembly out. So that's how I got those installed. You all, if you're familiar with Corvairs, you also know that the Monza dash, if it was an automatic car, had the shifter up in the top right-hand corner of it. So this dash had that. I no longer am going to be using that shifter. So I was able to fill that in and get that sanded down and basically cover that opening, but still yet show the existing Monza style dash that it has. The heater controls, I'm no longer going to be using those, but I'm going to use the chrome bezel there, and I may utilize switches or something else in that slot. I painted the dash flat black, and then I also painted that edge in a bright silver, kind of matching the colors I'm going to use in the car. So try to get a little bit of distinction between this dash assembly and how it fits into the dash component built into the car. So that's the dash. It turned out pretty well, and anxious to see how it looks when the rest of the car is done. The next thing I wanted to update you on are the headlights for the car. You can see that I'm still waiting on the transaxle, so I'm now working on different sub-assemblies in the car, getting them altered and updated and fixed if need to be, as I'm waiting for the transaxle. So there's plenty to do as I'm waiting for that, and I'm just clicking them off my list. But This headlight assembly obviously had the old incandescent headlights. I've replaced them with a headlight assembly. It's called 575 and it's from Dapper Lighting. And there's a high beam and a low beam, and both of those are LED. And then both of these bulbs have twin halos. They have a white halo that will be used for driving lights, and they have an amber halo that will be used for turn signals. So when the car is running, the white halo will be shining, and when that side's turn signal comes on, the white halo goes off and the amber then flashes with the flasher. So that'll provide the turn signaling. I'm planning on utilizing the existing turn signal units in the panel below the bumper. I'm going to try to convert those to some sort of a fog light, white-based fog light. So more work to be done there, but I'll have turn signal, headlight, and parking lights all built into these assemblies. They're really nice units. They fit in really well. However, the notches that held the incandescent bulbs in, there are three notches that fit into that little holding disc. These lights, the notches are in different places. So to make the top in the same spot, I had to actually cut new notches in those 4 dishes to get those lined up. So that was done. It's pretty easy to do. Just had to make sure I got them lined up and cut the correct width. And then the other thing with this is, as you all, if you ever dealt with this these kinds of lights before, these halogen lights are quite long, and they stick out the back. So I had to put some holes in the back of this tub to have be able to have access to those light bulbs. So those unscrew and come out through those holes. Since this front of this car is going to have the radiator in it, it won't be a trunk. There's no worries about having that being open. In fact, having the air go through that helps cool those light bulbs down. So that's really the only modification I had to do, is put some openings in the back and notch for those bulbs. Pretty good setup, and I'm anxious to see how they look in the car when it's working. Well, that's it for this update. Thanks again for watching and keeping an eye on me. I appreciate all of your comments and suggestions. I am learning a lot about doing these kinds of projects. Some things I know well, there are a lot of things that I don't, and whenever your suggestions come through, I certainly read them and think about how they might apply and what I ought to be doing. So appreciate that. For the next video, I'm going to be working on the doors. I'm going to convert the manual window mechanism to an electric mechanism. Looking at various options for doing that. So that'll be a primary part of this next update, is what I do with the doors. I'm also going to probably start to do some of the exterior sanding on them, getting them ready to be painted when the time comes. So more to be done, and look for my next video, and the doors will be part of that, and there may be some other things. So stay tuned, and again, thank you for watching, and appreciate all your comments.